You do not need to sign the Cooperative Compensation Supplement in an Oklahoma real estate contract. What's up, everybody? I'm Jeffrey Long, attorney, real estate broker, and educator with our Pro Academy. And in this video, we're going to cover 3 things that you absolutely must know about Oklahoma's new Cooperative Compensation Supplement from the Oklahoma Real Estate Commission. Stay with me so you know exactly how to handle this new way that we negotiate compensation. First, what is this supplement for? This is a new form produced by the Oklahoma Real Estate Commission that's going to allow the buyer to ask the seller to use proceeds of the sale to pay the buyer's agent. Now look, with the NAR settlement and these rule changes and practice changes that went into effect, the old way of doing business isn't really around anymore. Because here's how things used to work. A listing agent would take on a listing and they would negotiate with the seller to not only pay themselves, but they would often also negotiate compensation for a buyer's agent. Then when they listed it in the MLS, they would put that offer of compensation in the MLS, and whatever buyer's agent brought the buyer, then they would be entitled to that compensation that was offered. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. The way we used to negotiate compensation, it's not around because we don't have it in the MLS anymore. So we got to have new ways of doing it. That's where this form comes in. Because what you're typically going to see going forward, and I suspect will be very common in the future, probably the way that we'll all be doing it in the future, is for a buyer to ask the seller to pay the buyer's agent's compensation out of the proceeds of the sale using a term in the contract. Now, that's not going to happen in every case, but if you want to do that, if that's what the buyer is asking for, well, then this supplement can be used so that the buyer can ask the seller to pay the buyer's agent out of the proceeds of the sale. Second thing you need to know, this is an addendum to the purchase contract. Now, it's called the Cooperative Compensation Supplement, which sounds very similar to the cooperative agreement that was sometimes used in transactions when the broker was asking the other broker to pay compensation. That's right, that old cooperative agreement is when typically you're going to some other MLS that you're not a participant in, and you want to ask the listing broker to pay you as the buyer's agent. So both brokers would enter into what we typically called a cooperative agreement to cover that compensation. Now, this cooperative compensation supplement, while named very similarly, is something completely different. This is an agreement between the buyer and the seller that is an actual addendum to the contract. That means you need to know how to use it. This doesn't get sent ahead of time to the seller. This isn't something that gets sent to the listing broker. This isn't something that is separate from the purchase contract. It is an addendum to the purchase contract. So when you're completing your contract, your offer for your buyer, you need to make sure that you have all the necessary addenda attached. So perhaps if they're getting financing, well, then you're going to make sure that the right financing addendum is attached. And in this case, if the buyer's asking the seller to pay you out of the proceeds of the sale, then you want to make sure that this cooperative compensation supplement is attached. So on page 1 of the contract, you'll check the box up there that says, hey, there's a cooperative compensation supplement attached. The buyer's going to sign it along with the rest of the contract and the rest of the addenda, and it's all going to get put together as a full offer that goes to the seller. So this is an addendum to the contract, not something separate, not something outside of the contract. It's actually attached to the contract. Now look, if you appreciate what we're doing here, producing some videos that helps you understand things like this new contract addendum, then please go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. That helps us know that we are making the right videos that you care about. And while you're down there, go ahead and hit that like button. That's going to help us know that this video was helpful for you. The third and final point that you need to know is that you do not need to sign the agreement, and you absolutely shouldn't. Look, this is an agreement between the buyer and the seller, not broker to broker. And yes, there is a line on there where you can list the brokerage name under both the buyer's and the seller's signature for whatever brokerage is helping that particular side of the contract. That doesn't mean that you need to sign it. There's a reason why there's no signature block on there for the brokers, because you aren't a party to the contract. This is a contract between the buyer and the seller, and the buyer's just asking the seller to take some of the proceeds to send it back over to the buyer's side to pay the buyer's agent. You don't need to sign it. You're not a party to the contract. And that's really important to remember, because if you do sign it, then you're kind of trying to make yourself party to the contract. Look, here's the deal. There's this common belief that goes back time immemorial where people have said that you cannot add compensation to the contract. It's prohibited. And frankly, that is a misunderstanding about Standard of Practice 16-16 in the NAR Code of Ethics. You can go take a look at that, but basically what it says is no, we can't use the terms of a contract to try to change the listing broker's offer of compensation. That means if the listing broker was only offering X% and we wanted to get paid more, you couldn't put in the contract something like the seller agrees that the listing broker's compensation will be Y instead of X. That's trying to impact the listing agreement and what the listing agent is doing, and we can't do that with the terms of the contract. That's what's prohibited. What is not prohibited, what has never been prohibited, is for a buyer to ask the seller to take proceeds of the sale to pay the buyer's agent. Always been permissible, and that's absolutely something that we'll be doing going forward, and that's what this Cooperative Compensation Supplement is for. And for whatever it's worth, that's exactly what the Department of Justice wants us to be doing. It is perfectly permissible, it is perfectly legal. And yes, while compensation for the buyer's agent might be included in the contract now, that doesn't automatically make the buyer's agent or broker a party to the contract simply because they're getting some proceeds. Who else is getting proceeds from the sale? Well, the lender might be getting some proceeds at the end of the day to pay for origination fees, and the county is getting some funds to pay for the recording of the deed and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, there's lots of other parties, right? There's other people that are getting proceeds of the sale. You might be getting a home warranty, which is getting proceeds of the sale to pay for the home warranty. None of those entities are parties to the contract, and neither are we, simply because the buyer's agent is getting some funding from the proceeds of the sale as agreed to between the buyer and the seller. But you absolutely don't need to sign it, and you shouldn't sign it. So please, if you're a buyer's agent, don't sign the Cooperative Compensation Supplement. If you're a listing broker, please don't sign it, and don't ask the buyer's agent to sign it either. This is just an addendum to the contract, just like any other. So the only people that need to sign it, because who's the contract between? The buyer and the seller. That's who needs to sign it. Look, if you have other contract questions that you think we should make a video about, drop a comment and let us know what they are. We'll see what we can do. Thanks for checking out this video on the Oklahoma Real Estate Commission Cooperative Compensation Supplement. See you next time.